All right. Am I on? Okay. Some churches you go in, they have the monitors like blaring, so you can hear it. That's all you can hear. But Winston thinks I'm funny anyway, so that's all that matters. If I can make Winston laugh, that's all that matters. It's good to see y'all again this evening, and we're excited to be back here tonight. We had a great time with you this morning and enjoyed all the fellowship and everybody stopping by to talk. And we really like friendly churches. Sometimes we stand at the back and nobody even looks at us when they walk out. They just keep going right on. So we really like it when people are friendly to us. It makes us feel better anyway. Even if you're faking it, just don't tell us. It's fine. So if you would take your Bibles tonight and turn to Daniel chapter number 1. Daniel chapter number 1. How many of y'all believe that that the devil's pretty smart? Y'all believe that? You should believe that. The devil's pretty smart. He knows what he's doing. He's been around a lot longer than you and I have. He's been around a lot longer than you and I, all of us put together, have. And he's got a lot of years of experience doing what he does best. And, if he was clever enough, if you will, to fool Adam and Eve into sinning in a perfect place, I imagine he doesn't have to put that much effort into us sometimes. And he definitely doesn't have to put that much effort into the world, trying to get the world to sin, because that's just kind of what they do. But in Daniel chapter 1, there's something very interesting that happens in this chapter. Now, of course, I'm sure you've all heard this chapter. I really enjoyed the book of Daniel, even before it gets to the prophetic chapters. Just the story and the testimony of Daniel and the testimony of these Hebrew boys. But as I was reading this, especially since I became a dad, and I have Winston, and I can't remember, I don't think I told you, but Maggie's about 15 weeks along right now, and we're going to have a baby girl. So that's exciting and also terrifying to me because I don't know anything about girls. I have 2 younger brothers, and my youngest brother has 4 boys, and that's all I know, and then, of course, my son. So I don't know anything about girls at all, so y'all are going to have to pray for me there. But since I became a dad, and even since the Lord has called us into this type of ministry with these children, we've always enjoyed working with kids. We've always enjoyed working with teens. And the Lord even began opening our eyes to things as we worked in a youth group, as we were working with some kids from all different backgrounds, ones that were in Christian school or homeschooled and public school. And there's a few instances that really stick out in my mind of how the world really got a grip on some of these kids. And, I'm not saying good parents, good home life, good backgrounds, but the world and friends and everything can really have a big influence on these kids. And so, and even as we saw in South Africa, what has an influence on children and why it has an influence on children. There was something in this chapter, throughout this chapter, that really jumped out at me because, if you've ever been to a youth conference or a youth revival or done anything with youth, you've probably heard at some point someone teach out of Daniel chapter 1, verse number 8, but Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with the portion of the king's meat. And of course, we all know that about how Daniel purposed in his heart all of these things. But what led up to that? Why was Daniel ever put in this position in the first place? Like, what was it that happened? And there's something in this chapter that really jumped out at me. And if we begin reading the story in verse number 1, we're just going to kind of skip through this chapter a little bit, but there's some certain things that I'd like to pull out of it and show you. In verse number 1, it says, "In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, came Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, unto Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand with part of the vessels of the house of God, which he carried into the land of Shinar to the house of his God. And he brought the vessels into the treasure house of his God." I like a lot of these stories out of the Bible, like some of them that are just almost like reading a history book. I enjoyed history, mainly because, again, I was a boy with two brothers, and so I liked military stuff and military tactics and fighting and swords and guns and, all of that kind of stuff. There are a lot of these stories that I enjoy reading out of God's Word because it's history, for one. It's true history, but it also shows me some of these things. And there's a lot of things in the Bible that we can look at, and we can see some of the tactics of the devil. And we can get a really good insight into how he works and why he does what he does. And so it's amazing to me when we read this, we see that as Nebuchadnezzar came into the land of Judah, there were certain steps that he would take because he was a conquering king. He went in, he had military knowledge, he had a conquering army. When he went in, it was to take over. It wasn't to just say, hey, you guys can do whatever you want, we're just going to be here for a little bit. No, he wanted to take over. He wanted to rule that whatever it was, whatever country, whatever city it was that he was going into. So as he goes into the land of Judah, and of course, the devil being behind this, because anyone that's going to attack Israel is obviously not of God, is of the devil. And I believe that continues forth even into today as well. So, but as he goes in, the first thing that he does is he goes straight into the house of God. He takes out all of their precious things. He takes out the vessels out of the treasure house of Jehovah God, and he takes them back to Babylon, and he puts all of these things into the house, the temples and the houses of their gods. So the first thing he does is he completely disrupts their religious system, if you will. He goes in and he disrupts their way of worship because this was their life. The temple and this God that they served, that dictated all of their laws. That dictated their lifestyle. That was everything to them. At least it should have been everything to them. So he goes in and he disrupts all of these things, and he takes all of these things out of the house of their gods, and he says, these don't belong to your God anymore. Now these belong to our gods. This isn't your way of worship anymore. This is your way of worship now, because our God has conquered your God, and we're greater than you are. So again, the devil's he's smart. When he goes in, he knows where to strike first, and he knows what to do to really set us on edge. But it's not this first thing that I want to talk to you about this evening. While that is a good tactic for him to do, to go in and disrupt all of these things and disrupt their way of life, what really stood out to me was the second thing that he does. Because it's kind of, him going into the house of God was kind of, okay, that makes perfect sense to me. That's good, But the second thing he does in verse number 3, and the king spake unto Ashpenaz, the master of his eunuchs, that he should bring certain of the children of Israel, and of the king's seed, and of the princes, children in whom was no blemish, but well favored, skillful in all wisdom, and cunning in knowledge, and understanding science, and such as had ability in them to stand in the king's palace, and whom they might teach the learning and the tongue of the Chaldeans. So after he goes in and he disrupts their system of worship and disrupts their lifestyle in this way, the second thing that he does is he goes after these kids, these children of Israel, these children that are in the palace. And I thought, how is that any kind of tactic at all? If you're going in, why, it doesn't say that he went after the king or the elders. He went after the children. And not just any children. He went after the really good children. He went after the ones that everybody looked up to. He went after the ones that were in the palace, maybe being groomed to live in the palace or work in the palace or be future leaders. That's who he went after. He went after the next generation, if you will, in Judah. So why is that? What was it about this tactic? What was it about this that could have that much of an impact That would be the second thing that he goes after trying to conquer this land. Well, there were some things that he wanted to change about these Hebrew boys, these Hebrew children. And he knew that if he could change certain things about them, that it would affect those that came up after them. How many of you ever looked up to someone, as a kid? Did y'all ever look up to anybody? Sure, we had role models, right? You either looked up to your parents, or some people aspire to be like, athletes, or we look up to, your teacher or your preacher, or, when you're younger, you always look up. When you're not a teenager, you look up to the teenager. You say, man, I can't wait till I'm a teenager. And then when you're a teenager, you look up to the people in college. You say, man, I can't wait to be in college. And when you're in college, you look up to the people who have, good jobs. And man, I can't wait to be a career person. And then when you're in that career, you're in that job, you say, man, I wish I could be a teenager again. It's a weird cycle, right? But it was last year. I can't remember what month. It was late last year, and we were leaving Hinesville, and we were going back home to North Carolina. So we're going through Richmond Hill, and I see out of the corner of my eye something lime green in the mirror. And anytime you see something lime green, you know it's probably going to be pretty cool. And so I see something lime green, and I turn my head, and I was like, Maggie, there's a Lamborghini beside of us. I was like, this is really cool. And it pulls up right beside of us. And so I'm like, oh man, obviously coveting it, and had to ask for, repentance later. But there's a sticker on the window. And it wasn't a sticker that you would think you would see on a Lamborghini. It said YouTube on it. And I was like, who on earth would put a YouTube sticker on a brand new Lamborghini? And so I was like, Maggie, go on YouTube and type in lime green Lamborghini. And so she was like, oh, here it is. Here's the guy. And it's just some random, strange person that makes stupid videos on YouTube and has like 10 billion followers. And somehow, because of all of this junk, he now has a Lamborghini. They didn't have cell phones when I was a teenager. And we didn't have video cameras, and there wasn't social media. Otherwise, me and Maggie's brother would be billionaires. Because I promise you, there's not many more people that have done more stupid things than we did when we were teenagers. We just didn't record it. All we can do is tell stories about it. And but some of you younger people, some of you older people might know. I had never heard this term before until I kind of, we looked at that, and then I knew some other people who like to be active on social media. They're called influencers, right? All these people are called influencers. They're people that try to influence you to like their stuff, to subscribe to their channel, to donate money to them, so they can make more dumb videos about themselves. And I don't get it at all, because most of it is like just I don't understand how they make all those videos and how they get that many people to follow them, that they can afford $1 million cars. But they do. They live up to their name. They influence people. They influence younger kids. I've got some nieces and nephews who love watching people play video games online. And I'm like, go play it yourself or something. It's like watching fishing on TV, I don't understand it. But these people they're influencing these kids. They're influencing the next generation. They influence how they dress, how they talk, how they act. They influence anything about them. And these kids, these younger kids, try to model themselves after these people or mimic these people and, quote them and be like them. There's something to this. When Nebuchadnezzar went in and snatched up all these kids out of Judah, he knew exactly what he was doing. And for him to conquer this land and make this land like him, all he had to do was influence a certain number of these kids, and he could have that land exactly how he wanted it. So what is it that he tried to change about them? What is it that he tried to do to these children of Judah that would make them serve him or make them more like Babylon? Well, there's three things quickly here that he tried to change about them. The first thing that he tried to change was their character. In verse number 4, when we see what kind of the children that he took out of here, it says, children in whom was no blemish, well-favored, skillful in all wisdom, cunning in knowledge, and understanding science, and such as had ability in them to stand in the king's palace, and to whom they might teach the learning and the tongue of the Chaldeans. He wanted to change their character. He wanted to take them out of the king's palace. He wanted to take all of these really smart kids and began teaching them in the ways of Babylon. It says teach them the learning and the tongue of the Chaldeans. He wanted to start changing who they were and start telling them, you're no longer children of Israel or children of Judah. You're no longer followers of Jehovah, but now you're going to be incorporated into Babylon. You're going to learn our language. You're going to learn our customs. You're going to learn everything about our culture, and you're going to be more like us. And he knew that if he could take these children, and if he could start influencing them in this way, influencing them away from God and towards Babylon, that all he had to do was influence a couple of them, or just this handful of them, and then the next generation that looked up to them. You know, just like I told you, we're always, when you're younger, of course, you're always looking up to the older ones. He didn't have to worry about influencing the adults. Because, I don't see a lot of adults out there that are really having much of an impact on the next generation. And when I say adults, I mean sensible, wise people. But I do see people in their late teens, in their early 20s, who have a profound impact on the next generation. Everything they do is cool. They can't do anything wrong. They're the smartest people out there. They barely graduated high school and didn't even go to college and don't know how to do anything at all, job or career-wise, but somehow they can turn on a video camera and they are the smart. We're going to put all of our trust and all of our stock in them because they make cool videos, because they do cool things online. And there's all these cool pictures of them everywhere. If he could influence these, then he could influence all the rest in Judah. He just needed a couple. So he wanted to change their character. He wanted to make them more like the Babylonians and less like the people of Judah. He wanted to make them appear more like the world, if you will, and less like God's people. So he tried to change their character. Secondly, he wanted to change their name, which he did in verse number 6. Now among these were of the children of Judah Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, unto whom the prince of the eunuchs gave names, for he gave unto Daniel the name of Belteshazzar, and unto Hananiah of Shadrach, and to Mishael of Meshach, and unto Azariah of Abednego. So he did change their names. Well, what's significant about that? They're in a new culture. They're in a different thing. I met a lot of people at Pensacola from other countries, especially people that were from different parts of Asia and Korea, and I couldn't say their name. And they would always adopt an American name, and you'd be like, hey, my name's Luke. I'm like, that's your name? Like, no, but you can't say my real name, so you just call me Luke. They would always adopt an American name when they came into our culture. So you say, what's so special about that? Well, in Hebrew, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah meant something. And I encourage you to look this up. It meant something in relation to God, to the God that they served in Judah. But Belteshazzar and Hananiah and Belteshazzar, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego meant something towards the Babylonian gods. So they were trying to change their name, as who they were called out loud, but in doing so, they were also trying to change their name as to who they were. So they're trying to change their character, how they talk, how they act. Now they're changing their name. They're trying to change who they are. Their names will no longer represent a Jehovah God. Their names will now represent some god in Babylon, some foreign god. Again, the God that conquered their God. They said, our God conquered your God, so your names mean nothing anymore because your God's been conquered. So now you need a name that represents something better than where you came from, something better than your God. And that's exactly what the world is trying to tell us right now, is that the name Christian means nothing. To be called a Christian, you don't want to be called a Christian. Of all the names that you could have, you really want to be called a Christian? And that's the world's attitude towards it. And that is having an impact on our young people in church. That's having an impact when they go to school every day. That's having an impact with their friends. You don't want to be called a Christian. Why would anyone want to be called a Christian? The Christians have a bad rap. The Christians, they don't have a very good name. Nobody likes the Christians. This is what the next generation is being told. And they're being encouraged to distance themselves from that name. They're being encouraged. It's sad that the Christian young people are being forced into those kinds of situations with it. Well, I just go to church because my parents go to church. Well, once I'm out of the house, I'm not going to go to church anymore. And so I go to that church, but I don't really believe everything that they say. That's what that's what my grandma believes. That's what my grandpa. I don't think that's what the Bible means anymore. We have encountered some sort of age of enlightenment in the last few years, and that's why I said that it's a lot of the younger people who are influencing the next generation, because the older people, they're just old, right? They're just old. They're just set in their ways. They don't know what they're talking about. They don't understand what's going on in the world right now. They don't get us. They don't get the younger generation. And that's just for the older people. And that's what he was trying to push off on these children. That if the next generation could see these people who were of a different character, speaking a different language, if the next generation would see these people who did not have that same character, have those same morals, and they would say, hey, that's Daniel, right? Oh, no, that's not. No, that's Belteshazzar. Belteshazzar? Who's Belteshazzar? Well, why is he calling himself Belteshazzar now? And if they could influence that next generation, he's got this country. But there was one more thing that he was trying to change in them. He was trying to change their appearance. And so in verse number 8, of course, Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with a portion of the king's meat. And so verse 9, God brought Daniel into favor and tender love with the prince of the eunuchs. And then, the story through verse number 17, how Daniel said, test us, just give us pulse and water to eat for 10 days and see if we're not any better than these others. And so that's what he did. And so they tested them for 10 days. And of course, after the 10 days, Daniel and these other three guys, they appeared, it says they appeared fatter in flesh than the other children, which should eat the portion of the king's meat. So by obeying God, they were coming out looking better than the ones who were now in sin, now disobeying God's word. But they were trying to change their appearance. You say, well, that was just something that they were eating and drinking. Okay, go eat McDonald's as much as I do on the road and see if it doesn't change your appearance just a little bit. There have been times in my life with some previous jobs, and now that we've been on the road some, to where I've told Maggie, I've said, listen, I'm just not going to eat tonight because the only thing in this town is a McDonald's, and I would rather starve to death tonight than have to eat McDonald's again. Or some sort of fat, like my body is rejecting it. Like I just can't even stand the thought of it anymore. But they were trying to change their appearance. They wanted them to look different. They didn't want them to look like God's people anymore. With these three things, these are three things that are happening in our country right now. These are three things that are happening all over the world. And if you say, well, I don't know, look at South Africa. I didn't know anything about South Africa other than I knew a couple of people who own their own businesses over here, did some concrete cutting and some other different things. And I thought they were really cool because they worked on their own dirt bikes, had all this shop. I loved going in their shop, seeing the things they would build. And they were just very self-reliant on fixing all of their stuff. So I was like, man, South Africa must be a pretty cool place, you know. And that was my perception of it. But then when I got there, then when I saw what was going on in these children's homes, in the public schools, in the family life of everything that's going on there, I thought, wow, the devil has a really good control over these children. And that's exactly what he was going for. He doesn't have to change mom and dad. If he can just get some of these kids, and if he can turn them against God and turn them against the church, that's all he's got to do. Because especially if he can get some of these kids that have a little bit of pull and a little bit of influence over others, he can affect millions with this mentality and with this mindset. And these are just 3 things that I saw in this chapter that he's trying to change about our children. So to make it personal, of course, this was forever ago. But to make it personal, the devil's tactics really, they don't change a whole lot. Even the way that we can see that he deceived Adam and Eve, he still tries that on us. And sadly, we still fall for it a lot. But this is what he is trying to do. This is how he is trying to, and succeeding, mind you, in turning the next generation against God, in turning the next generation against what is right. And this passage can be a great warning to us. You know, if a general was going to war and he could read and he could see how the enemy was formulating a plan, and he could look and say, man, they are patterning there. Just right after what has happened before in this history book here. Well, I can know how to defeat them now. That would be something great, right? You know, we have God's word, and he gives us a lot of warnings against how the devil attacks. He gives us a lot of warnings about things that we have the power, to change and to see coming. And this is one of them. Because we're Christians. It's our duty to give the gospel to the next generation. It's our duty to see that the next generation is taught in the right ways. That the next generation knows God. That they know his laws. That they know his commandments. That they know this book and what is in it. He was changing their character. He was changing their name. He was changing their appearance. And he did all these things so subtly. And that's what he's doing to our kids today. And I'm not just talking about my kids, your grandkids. They're our responsibility, but so is the rest of the world. It's our responsibility to get the gospel out to these kids. It's our responsibility to get the gospel out so they'll know Jesus Christ, so that they'll change their ways, so that they won't fall into this deceitful trap that the devil has set. And this is what our responsibility is right here. It's in verse number 20. Because of the stand that these 4 guys took, because of the way that they conducted themselves for a few years here, in verse number 18, it says, now at the end of the days that the king had said he should bring them in, then the prince of the eunuchs brought them in before Nebuchadnezzar. And the king communed with them, and among them all was found none like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Therefore stood they before the king. And in all matters of wisdom and understanding that the king inquired of them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and astrologers that were in all his realm. There is something that the world is very ignorant about. And there is something that is very ironic about that. about their ignorance. The world says, act like us, talk like us, look like us, put off that name, be like us, join us. If you want to drive the lime green Lamborghini and you want to be the CEO, you want to throw the big party, and you want to have all the friends, you want everybody to like you, you want to be successful in life, you want people to remember you when you die. If you want all of these things, then just be like us. Just join us. Just be like us. But what's so ironic about them saying that is because they think that's the truth. But what the Bible tells us is that and what's sad to say, I don't know how many children were taken out of the palace in Judah, but the Bible only gives us 4 names that took a stand for God. Now, that's kind of sad. We only have 4 names right here. But what does it say about these guys? It says in verse 20, in all matters of wisdom and understanding that the king inquired of them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and astrologers that were in all his realm. It doesn't say they were 10 times better than the other Hebrew children that were taken out. It doesn't say they were 10 times better than everyone in Nebuchadnezzar's palace. It says he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and all the astrologers that were in all his realm. Now understand that Nebuchadnezzar was kind of going for world domination at this time. When he says all of his realm, we could almost basically say that was the world. So to say that these 4 boys were found better, not better, 10 times better than anyone else in the whole world, that's a testimony. And that's a testimony that comes from God. That is only a testimony that comes from serving God and obeying God. Because while the Chaldeans were saying, be like us, talk like us, act like us, look like us, do all these things like us, and you'll be okay, that wasn't good enough for them. They obeyed God, and they were found 10 times better. 10 times better. I would love to have that kind of testimony. I would love for that to be written somewhere about me when I died, that I was a 10 times better Christian in the way that I served God. This is our duty. This is our responsibility. While the world is grabbing and tugging the next generation along and saying, be like us. We'll make you somebody. Come over here with us. We'll show you a good time. We'll show you what it means to be successful. We as Christians, we as the church, we need to be over here and we need to be saying, look, you can go over there and everything might be okay for a while because sin is okay for a season, right? But if you want to be 10 times better than the world, then serve God. We have got to have that testimony because there are so many things pulling and swaying the next generation towards the world and towards sin. We've got to have that testimony like these boys had. We've got to be those 10 times better Christians. We've got to show them that the world says that they've got it all together, but really they're just ignorant to the fact that serving God is the best thing that you could ever do with your life. That obeying God is the only way to be happy. It's the only way to be successful. It's the only way to live a proper life, obeying and following God's word. And while it may look like they've got it all together, they're just living in sin and their lives are falling apart. It's our responsibility. It's our duty to the next generation, to our kids, to our grandkids, to these. You know what I noticed? I wasn't even thinking about this this passage tonight. This morning when everybody was going out, and I thought, man, y'all have got a lot of young people. And I don't mean just kids. I mean all different ages. Like, wow, this is great. There's a lot of churches that are about to just close their doors because all they need is about 2 more people to die, and that's it. There's no young people. There's no They might have a couple grandkids in there, but the 5-year-olds can't carry on the church in the next 3 years. There's no young people. There's no one to carry on. There's no one to continue on in the church. We have got to show the next generation serving God is 10 times better than anything we could ever do with our lives. That doesn't mean that you have to all be called to preach, or you have to all be Sunday school teachers or missionaries. Don't worry, you don't have to all be a missionary. That just means serve him. Just obey his word. Just follow him. Give out the gospel to people. Just do our duty as Christians. Because if we don't show them, what's going to happen to them? In South Africa, if the next generation is not influenced for Jesus Christ, then it's going to end up just like this generation. And sadly, we know how sin works. It's usually not a flat plane. Sin just usually keeps going like this from generation to generation. The next generation is usually not the same amount of wicked as this generation. It's more. And the generation after that is more. It's got to stop somewhere. And let South Africa be the warning to us in America. If we don't do something about the next generation, if we don't guard our kids from this world and what's going on in it, then we're about to take another step down. We're going to step down in morals. We're going to go deeper into sin. And I don't like that. I don't like thinking about that. I don't like seeing that. But we need to think about it. We need to think about what's about to happen. And let it stir us. Let it do something in our hearts. Let it make us bold against some of the things that are happening in our world today and say, that's not right. Serving God is right. And there's only one way, and that's God's way. We've got to be that testimony. We've got to have that testimony. I encourage you, think about that. Think about being a 10 times better Christian. Not for your own sake, not so people can write on your tombstone, hey, Brandon Byerly was a 10 times better Christian, but so that I can die in peace knowing that I served my God and I did what I could to not let his words fall to the ground. That not my words, but his words got out and hopefully made a difference in somebody's life.